Oh, kia ora. Getting the kia ora on the messages, that's great. Oh, okay, sound check. Nikki, you can hear me, eh?
I can hear you loud and clearly. Fabulous.
I can see somebody on the chat has just said I'm having trouble getting audio, and I wonder if it might be us because we've been completely quiet.
Well, you know, we're renowned for being quiet people.
Yeah, look, I can talk non-stop for 60 minutes. You'll have trouble getting a question and let alone hearing the answer. I was thinking Blanche is going to come in a second and kind of give us an intro and get underway. And Nikki, you've got some slides ready to go. Is that right? You're going to share screen and do that stuff?
Either way, Rawiri, or we can just rock with questions. And I can, if you like, I can just talk to the 4 big common questions and then we can rock with others. Or would you prefer a few slides?
I like the idea of a few slides, just gives everybody a chance to get their questions lined up and ready to go. And so, like, I'm going to seize the moment, actually. So, me Mihio, I'm going to welcome everybody to the webinar. We've got this opportunity tonight to talk through the COVID vaccination, and really our intention is to provide an opportunity for people to ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. So I'll introduce myself and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Nikki Turner. I'm Rawiri McCree-Jansen, I'm a GP, and currently I work in Waharoa, and my tribal affiliation is Ngāti Raukawa, Ngāti Hinerangi, from just over the Kaimai Ranges. So I'm getting a few waves and nods from people that probably know me, and I've got some relations who work down there in Tauranga. And so it's a real pleasure to be with you tonight and just talk through and answer any questions you've got. It's my pleasure to hand it over to Dr. Nikki Turner, who's also a GP and pretty famous because she's done years of dedicated work working on immunisations in this country, and she leads the immunisation advisory group. And so over to you, Nikki. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Rawiri. Kia ora tātou to all, and thanks for the opportunity to talk tonight. So it's really just great to be able to talk with people and share a little bit about these vaccines and to really just see what people's questions are. So let's see first, I will just share the screen and I will, maybe we can't. The host has disabled my screen sharing. Sorry. If it's
it turns out I think I'm a co-host, so I'm going to do that for you.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, let's try again, team. Right, have you got my slides up there? Is that working?
Okay, try it now. No, but I've given you permission, so.
It should be working. Let's try again.
Okay.
We're going to try for one. Oh, we're having a problem here. I think we've got a problem. Well, it was a good theory, wasn't it?
It was a great theory.
Yeah, no, I've actually had some sort of problem.
Right. Blanche is going to get that sorted for us and she'll give us a little tap when we're ready to go.
I tell you what, if you like, without the slides, if people are comfortable, and we've got a PowerPoint with slides and I'm really happy to share them later. How about if I just run through the 4 common questions that come up on this all the time? For some reason, I've just shrunk into a small one. Is your vision all right your end, Rawiri?
Yeah, you look great. I can't see. You're not sharing any slides though.
I'm going to try once more before I give up. It might work. Here we go. We've got a chance now. It's just...
Yeah, that's it. Now it's coming in. Okay, yeah, beautiful.
Cool.
So we can see the small ones. Now we can see a medium size.
And now we go for a big one. All right.
Okay, yep, deal. Well,
so look, very briefly, firstly, what are these vaccines and how do they work? So that's the first question. We've had vaccines with us for centuries and we've got really good evidence that vaccines work. How do the COVID vaccines work? If everyone can see that little schematic picture in the top corner, this is what the COVID virus looks like. It's called corona because it looks like a crown, which is very badly named, I think. And those little red spikes on the top are little proteins on the outside. Now, that's what the body's immune system recognizes as being foreign and responds to and creates immune response. All the vaccines designed out there are designed to focus on that little spike protein on the outside. None of the vaccines we've got are live. They're all focused on that little protein. And you design a vaccine that looks like that protein, you give it to the body and the body responds and creates an immune response as if it was the virus itself. So that when you see the virus later on, your body's already primed and ready to act. So in that way, we know that most people get a good immune response. And when they actually see the virus, they're ready to act. And they either don't get sick at all or they get much less sick, more mildly. The vaccine that we now have in New Zealand, many of you will have heard, is called an RNA vaccine, the Pfizer-BioNTech. And it's essentially, it's a little piece, a strip of code inside a little bubble of lipid. Now, we all have lipid inside our bodies all the time. This is a little strip of a code material, genetic material. You inject it in the body looks at it and makes protein as if it's that protein on the outside of the virus. It's the protein the body makes that the body then itself responds and creates an immune response. Now, the important thing about this vaccine is there's no virus in it. It's not live. It has no virus in it. It's a piece of genetic material that the body then translates. It's not DNA. And because it's not DNA, it cannot get inside the nucleus of our cell. So it can't alter us. So it's got no genetic potential to alter us. So a very effective vaccine. This technology has been developed for many years, but the big science breakthrough is if you put it inside this little fat coat, it doesn't break up when we inject it. So it works better. Does the vaccine work? Well, look, we've got really, really good data now. Firstly, the very large clinical trials that were done on more than 40,000 people, which is a big clinical trial. We give half the vaccine, half you give an injection that's not got the active vaccine in it. From the clinical trials, they were very confident that more than 90% of people did not get COVID after being vaccinated when you compared to people who weren't vaccinated. So that means if you give 100 people this vaccine, 90 to 95 of the 100 people will not get sick when they're exposed to the real virus. Highly, highly effective vaccine. Now then you could say, well, that was just the clinical trial. Well, the advantage for New Zealand is because we didn't have rip-roaring disease like they have overseas, we could wait a few months before we decided to license it in New Zealand and approve it. In those few months, since it's been used in America, in Europe, in Israel, in England, and many other countries, it's been used like on over 100 million people. So this is not a new vaccine. It's got a huge amount of already existing data behind it. We've already seen from the Israelis, and we're seeing from the British that in real life, it is still reducing the impact of disease by more than 90%. So incredibly highly effective vaccine with a lot of data behind it. You give it 2 doses 3 weeks apart in the arm. At this stage, the clinical data was not done on children because it's adults and the elderly who were particularly severely affected. So the clinical trials are still being done on children. So until we see the data on children, we are not offering this vaccine to children. Now, what the clinical trials also were not done with pregnant women, but however, because it's not a live virus, it's not even a piece of a virus, we know that it's expected to be really safe in pregnant women. It's already been used around the world. Israel is using it with pregnant women. Initially, some of the countries were reluctant because there was a lack of data. They are now using it widely with pregnant women. The Americans have a database on more than 30,000 pregnant women. So the current New Zealand advice is the data on pregnant women is not as big as on other groups. So if you're not at risk of COVID, wait till you've had your pepe. But if you are pregnant and likely to be at risk of COVID, then the risk of COVID is really the issue. We're pretty confident this vaccine is expected to be safe in pregnancy. People who are breastfeeding, no problem at all with this vaccine. It will not affect your baby when you're breastfeeding. Big question comes up all the time. How come this vaccine has been developed faster than usual vaccines? Well, in many ways it hasn't. All the standard steps in the vaccine process are all there. So the need to do all the basic clinical trials, right from the lab through to all the stages to the big studies have all been done. But they were able to speed up the process. And they were able to speed it up for a whole lot of different reasons. They didn't rush through or miss any steps, but they ran a lot in series in parallel. So for example, they built big manufacturing plants ready to hit the ground running as soon as the vaccine was effective. The world stood to lose a lot of money if the vaccines weren't effective. But in that way, you didn't have a delay for 6 or 9 months till you built big manufacturing plants. As the scientific data came through, the big regulatory bodies in the world, the World Health Organization, the other countries, all looked at the data rather than waiting till the end, and that creates lots of delays. The clinical trials, they were able to recruit because so many people were keen to participate, and they were able to get outcomes because there was so much COVID disease. So they were faster than normal, but the normal standard process was all there. So nothing has been left out in terms of a standard safety process for these vaccines. So this is a little schema that I won't waste time on, but just to show you why you have the same process, but they were able to speed up elements of this time. Now, the big question for all of us is, how do I know this vaccine's safe? Well, firstly, the clinical data that New Zealand has looked at and decided it's safe came from those big clinical studies of more than 40,000 people. But since that time, even more than the clinical safety data, because New Zealand waited those few months, we now have safety data on many millions. And like what I've got example for here is the Americans have been looking very closely at their safety data. We now have safety data on more than 12 million doses very carefully looked at. This is some of the biggest body of safety data we have for any vaccine at all. So we've got a load of safety data. What does it show? There were no unexpected concerns. What it did show is that you can get allergic reactions like you can with any vaccine or any product that we give. so that we be prepared for them. We're used to them. New Zealand vaccinators are familiar with this. We see rare, occasionally severe allergic reactions with any vaccine or with any medication we use. So that's why when you go and get vaccinated, they ask you to wait for 20 to 30 minutes after you've been vaccinated to ensure that you don't have a problem. Our vaccinators are well equipped to manage severe allergic reactions. We've had the occasional one over the years and they've been managed well. So yes, we may see those rarely. Do we see anything else? Well, we do. We see sore arms. You can get a sore arm after this vaccine. You can get muscle aches. You can feel tired. You can get a headache. You can get a fever. For many of you who've had flu vaccine, this is not uncommon. So this is what we see with other vaccines, that you can certainly get a reaction after the vaccine for about 1 to 2 days. Is not unusual, and that's what we expected. It might be uncomfortable, but at least you can say this is a good sign the vaccine's working, and it's a really good sign. It can't give you the disease because it's not the virus. Now people say, oh, but you don't know if it's going to be safe long-term. How can you prove that? Well, yes, this vaccine is new, but what the American safety data has done is it looked at a background rate of common medical problems. So anything you can think of, a background rate of immune problems, a background rate of Bell's palsy, diabetes, heart, lung, all sorts of problems. What's the background rate in my community? When I add in a vaccine, does it go up? And the Americans have been able to show that all these important conditions, there's no increase of anything that might worry us. So if you say to me, well, why something appear in 30 years? What we know in medical science is we would be expecting it to appear by now. So that by watching, and we're talking about watching in tens of millions of people, we're watching for background rates. So we are really confident that this vaccine is being monitored really closely, which is why I think it's a really good vaccine for New Zealand to have approved. New Zealand will also do the same when it's introduced here and continue to monitor. Now, I think I've already covered this slide. What am I going to see after I get the vaccine? And like with many other vaccines, you can certainly get those sort of reactions. So I think we've covered that. Is there anyone who shouldn't have this vaccine? Well, anyone who's feeling really unwell on the day. If you're feeling sick, if you've got a fever, go home and wait till you're better, okay? Anybody else, unless you've had a severe allergic reaction to anything in the vaccine itself, then you're fine to go ahead and get vaccinated. I've discussed the issue of pregnancy. Pregnant women can have this vaccine. It's not expected to be a problem, but because the safety data is a little less on pregnant women at the moment, if you're not at risk of the disease, then you can wait till after your baby's born. The questions we don't know and that we're still waiting for is we don't know when you've had this vaccine, how long lasting it'll be. It's not going to last forever. We know that because you can get the disease again. The disease doesn't last forever. So we will expect to see that the effects of the vaccine will wane, and probably at some stage we will need boosters. We're just not sure when. The other important question for you folks out there is if I'm vaccinated, I then know that I'm really likely to be protected myself, but will it stop me from carrying the virus and spreading it to my whānau or to anybody else in my community? Well, look, the early data coming through is showing that yes, these vaccines are likely to reduce the fact that I'll carry it in my throat and spread it to someone else. We don't know how effective it'll be, but we do know it'll have some effect. So when you have this vaccine, it won't just protect you, it will to some extent reduce your risk of passing this virus to someone else. So that, I think, is a really crucial point for us, that when I get vaccinated, and I really want this vaccine because I, as a scientist with years of experience in vaccines, can see this is a really good vaccine. I want it for myself and for my family. And if I have it, I will have it to protect my elderly parents, to protect my children who as yet can't get vaccinated, and to protect the people around me. When can we start offering it to children? We hope there will be safety and effectiveness data in the next few months. So until that time, we have to wait. And that's the end of my presentation. I hope it covers some of the really common questions, but please let's go on and see what questions people have got. And I'll stop.
Right, so I'm going to go back over some of that, and it's okay if the questions kind of get us to repeat some of the story. But if you
Shall I stop the share now, Rawiri?
Yep,
I'll stop
yeah,
it.
stop the sharing.
Got it.
I did want to think about the pregnancy thing, because I think that's, I can imagine some of my patients, and I was talking to some port workers last week, and you can imagine that somebody goes and gets their vaccine and then finds out they're pregnant, or somebody who's thinking of getting pregnant wants to ask the question about having the vaccine. Somebody who didn't know they were pregnant actually is pregnant, gets the vaccine done, all of that. And so if I hear you right, then you and I are both in that kind of GP role. We would be going, yep. Rule number one is it's your choice. Nobody's forcing you to have the vaccine. Everybody in New Zealand, it's free and everybody gets the choice. And if somebody was worried about it, you'd kind of have that conversation, which says, actually, if you're in a job where there's a high risk of being exposed to the virus, then I think it's safe and I'm okay and I'll recommend it to you. Still your choice. And then somebody else, you'd say, well, if you're in a really low risk situation, yeah, that's completely cool. Wait until you've had baby and then have your COVID vaccine then. So there's a number of choices. You're nodding as I say that. That's the sort of conversation you'd have with a patient?
Absolutely. So many countries in the world where they're flooded with COVID and high risk, if I was pregnant, I'd be taking the vaccine. From a science point of view, this vaccine is really safe. It won't be crossing the placenta to the infant. If anything, all you'll be giving the infant is actually your developing protection you'll be offering to the infant. So from a first principles point of view, it's likely to be very safe. The accumulating data is backing that up. But in New Zealand, most of us are not seeing COVID at the moment. So there is no rush for a pregnant woman to need to get vaccinated. So yep, I feel it's safe. I'd be happy for you to have it, but it's totally appropriate to wait in the current New Zealand environment unless you think you're at risk.
All right, beautiful. So we're talking about safe, and we're saying, like most of the vaccines that we have in New Zealand, we're used to it for childhood immunisations, and we've got HPV, and we've got MMR for measles, and we've got flu vaccination, all of that. So the severe side effects, the allergic reaction kind of stuff, in my memory, we're talking about something like 5 in a million people. And so that's pretty rare, but we're ready for it. As we roll out the vaccine, every place where we do the vaccine has got to have somebody who could manage that if it happened, right?
Yep. And we have had severe allergic reactions to other products in New Zealand. Both Rawiri and I, as frontline general practitioners, have been involved in managing what we call anaphylaxis. And you manage it effectively. And our vaccinators, that's a core part of their training. Okay,
so that's one of the questions Anonymous has typed in. It's really great to have that question. Have there been any severe side effects from COVID-19 vaccines in the world? Yes, there have. 5 in a million anaphylaxis or severe allergic reactions. But just to be really clear, you and I were talking the other day, and I think the truth is that actually nobody has died from those anywhere in the world. Is that correct?
No. Now, what happens is when you give a big population vaccine, some people die, so you'll have a road traffic accident, or some people die of something else. So what they did worry about is giving it to very frail elderly, and quite a few people died afterwards, particularly in one of the Scandinavian countries. And the Americans actually looked at that, and they looked at a big group of very elderly people who were vaccinated and watched what happened for the month afterwards versus non-vaccinated equivalent. And what they saw is there's no increase in the rate of deaths. So, you will see people dying after a vaccine, but at this stage, we have no recorded people dying caused by the vaccine. And we are definitely looking at the background rate. So this is not guessing. This is the science watching really closely, and they'll continue to do so.
All right. There's a nice question about effective. And I imagine that there's 100 people watching us. There's 35 participants or something, but imagine there's 2 or 3 people in each Zoom watching us. And I go, if we had this vaccine for 100 people, we're expecting that it would be effective for 93 or 94 of them, right?
That's right.
And you and I think that's a fantastic vaccine. Like that's awesome, right? Yeah. It's better than some of the other ones we do. It's better than the measles.
Better than almost all of them. It's similar to the measles containing vaccine. It's way better than almost all the others. This is given us much better vaccines.
And in thinking about that 93 or 94 out of 100 people it works, we still notice that actually there's 5, 6, 7 people it won't work for, and we can't tell who that is. So we've still got to kind of still treat that as the vaccination's done a great job for us, but it's still possible that somebody could have could get the COVID and could spread it. So we've still got to have all those other protections in place, right?
Well, that's right. And we know that from anything in medicine, that nothing is 100% in life. You know, we can't give 100% surety for anything. We can give very high surety for most people, but there'll always be someone who, for some reason we don't fully understand, their immune system doesn't respond. So that's the way it is. We can't guarantee 100%, but this is the best you'll ever see in science. You won't get better performing vaccines than 90 to 95%.
All right, another beautiful question from Anonymous, because you showed in there that actually this vaccine has gone through all of our normal regulatory procedures. We've done it quickly, but we haven't rushed it. We didn't do it under emergency authorization like America did and some of those other countries that are really messed up with COVID. So we've done all of that. And so Anonymous knows that when it was approved, there was 58 conditions on that. And so I was talking about that the other day. And what I liked about that was MedSafe said, yep, we can approve the vaccine based on the data that we've got. And lots of those conditions were really saying, and Pfizer, by the way, you will continue to give us all of the data so that we can watch this. Yeah. That's sort of like actually 58 out of the 62 conditions were about continuously giving us the data so we can see it.
Yeah. And like we were talking about before, there's still things we don't know. So we know enough to be confident about its safety now and about its effectiveness, but there's things we don't know. We don't know whether we'd use this long term, whether we'd boost. You know, we still really need to know more data around children in particular. We'd like to know more data if we can figure out who is less likely to respond, you know, who is that 5%. So there's still stuff we want to know, and we'll be learning more as we go along.
All right. And so now get to a question, because it's okay if we don't know the answers, right? And there's a question that I don't know the answer to. What role does the changes to the WHO case definition criteria have on the measurement of declining cases in a population where vaccines have simultaneously been introduced? And so I'm going, man, I don't follow the World Health Organization case definition changes. Do you?
Yeah, I do. Sadly, I'm a nerd. I apologize for that. There's several answers to this. Firstly, the clinical trials, they had a set definition. So those clinical trials we talked about when they did more than 40,000 people, they didn't change the definition because otherwise you wouldn't have a valid clinical trial. So firstly, the large clinical trials have to have the same definition all the way through the trial, right to the end of it. And secondly, yes, case definitions has been changed slightly, but they weren't changed exactly at the same time as vaccines were introduced into countries. So the in-country reporting experience we're now getting, like from Israel, they're using the same case definition there. So yeah, there has been some case definition changes, and you have to look at, when you look at the real world country data, you have to match it and see whether it changed or not. It's a really good question, and it pulls up epidemiologists if they haven't thought about it. So thank you for that. Love that question. It's my nerdy SWOT science stuff.
All right, okay. Well, I'm going to switch topic now. I want to go to Sandra's question, which was about, Sandra's hoping to travel internationally, in the future. Some places might require proof that you've had the vaccine. If I have the Pfizer one now, can I have a different one later? Like self-funded, she's saying. But it reminds me, like, I'm old enough to remember when you used to have a vaccine certificate for yellow fever to go to certain countries. You think we're heading back to something like that?
Yeah, we're just speculating here. I mean, I think we probably are. Countries are talking about it already. Obviously, there's quite an equity problem at the moment that only a few countries can get it. So if you put that in place for travel at the moment, it'd be really unfair. But I think there's quite a lot of discussion going on internationally that I would suspect that something like that may happen. I'm purely speculating.
Yeah, so you get two GPs thinking about it, and we think, yes, it could be part of the future. Okay. Now this one's impossible because this one's just such a challenge for me. Do you have a simple analogy to explain to a community that, where English is the second language? Do you have a simple analogy to explain how the vaccine works? I'm saying no. Beautiful question. I don't. It's not in me to figure out how to do that, but
I don't know either. I don't know either. You know what I think is that you have to learn your own language for your own community, and that I can try it in 3 or 4 different cuts, and some communities will hear it in different ways from others. So we can make it as simple as we like. It may or may not work. So my answer is that our bodies respond to viruses as foreigners and create an immune reaction. A vaccine is acting in the same way by not using the virus, but by using something that copies the virus. That's my simplest. It may work for some people. Some people are clever at me at making it sound what makes sense for people.
And we'll do a different webinar on colonisation, the Treaty of Waitangi and stuff like that, right? So foreigners and, okay. Okay, here's a beautiful
Foreign
question.
viruses. Your viruses love to travel.
Okay, which is the best vaccine?
Yeah, really, really good question. I love these questions. So look, at the moment, these RNA vaccines are looking incredibly good. The vector vaccines, maybe not so good, but the vector vaccines might have longer duration of immunity for a single dose. So in a sense, the vector vaccines are like the Oxford one. So in a sense, at the moment, they've got different characteristics. And for a 2-dose, these are probably the highest performing, but the Oxford type vaccines might be better if you just got a single dose. So I can't answer that, but to say at the moment, currently in the data today, we've got the best vaccine there is out there. We're really fortunate. This one and a vaccine called the Moderna.
So one of the tricky things though is, imagine that there was a choice of vaccines. Now, okay, there is no tricky part of this question because we don't have a choice currently. We've got Pfizer. To be honest, we've got Pfizer for as long as I can see. I can't see when we're going to get one of the other ones.
No.
The other ones haven't even submitted their safety data yet. So certainly we've agreed that MB's gone out to try and purchase the other ones, but that's some time away and I can't tell how far away it is. The answer for me of what's the best vaccine is the first one I get offered, all right?
Yeah.
So all of those 4 that MB's kind of been negotiating to get, if any one of those was offered to me, my answer is yes. So the first one offered to me is the best one, I'm up for it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. This vaccine is so highly performing, I'd be mad to turn it down. Having said that, the next 2 that we're possibly looking at, the early data on them is also looking really, really promising. So pretty impressive, really. There are some vaccines out there in the world that aren't acting quite so well. And you'll be pleased to know that New Zealand's not considering them. So it's not like all the vaccines are brilliant. There are some that aren't quite so good, and New Zealand is not considering them.
I was interested the Russian vaccine because when I heard about that, I thought, not sure about the Russians and their data. But to the extent that we can see data, that looks like a good vaccine. It doesn't look like we're going to purchase it. But if I was sitting in a country where Sputnik 5 was being offered, I think I would figure out, yep, that's a pretty good vaccine. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, well, the advantage of that one is it's been published in the proper clinical trial. So any vaccine that's published and has its data scrutinized, and good on the Russians, it's been published, its data's been scrutinized, and it looks really good. So I agree with you.
Okay, the Centre for Adverse Reactions to Medicines, CARM, tell us about that, because the question is there a robust reporting system set up for those who are vaccinated and if they have any adverse side effects?
Yeah, so MedSafe in New Zealand, our regulatory body is in charge of overseeing this. They fund Centre for Adverse Reaction Monitoring based at the University of Otago, who collect all the reports on adverse events following vaccination. Now, there's many different ways of doing it. So the traditional way that we're still doing is that yourself or your healthcare provider, it doesn't matter who, if you get a reaction that is unexpected and not what you were expecting, or just you're not sure, we report the whole lot to CARM. And it goes, you can do it yourself online, you can do it through a telephone, your healthcare provider can do it. There's lots of different ways of doing it. So that's one thing. The other thing is we're looking at active monitoring. We're trying to set up an active monitoring system where we go out to a small group of people, not everybody, and say, how did it go? Did you have any problems? And the third way New Zealand's going to do it, and this is what I talked about what the Americans are doing, is we've measured our background rates of common conditions. So if you say to me, I've got heart disease, is it going to make it worse? I've got diabetes, will it make it worse? We're measuring our background rates. And then we will be able to say before or after we introduce these vaccines, were there any different? So there's 3 different ways we're measuring safety here.
Okay, cool. And because, you were involved when we rolled out the meningococcal New Zealand B vaccine, right? Really important vaccine program. And we had a really robust program to measure anything, yeah?
Yeah, so it's really similar. The advantage now is we're more technological and we can data match way quicker. So
All right, quick one for you. When's Johnson & Johnson vaccine coming to New Zealand? Because I've heard you only need one dose.
Yeah, they've just been licensed in the States. So once again, New Zealand could purchase them. As yet, New Zealand, we don't rush through agency licensure. So New Zealand is still considering the licensure here. So I don't know the answer to that, whether we stick with Pfizer or whether it comes through in a few months. And yes, they intend to license it for a single dose, remembering that for all these vaccines, I think we're going to eventually need a booster.
Okay. Did you notice that Italy stopped that the AstraZeneca one being exported? I thought, like, there's a lot of complications to getting the vaccine in, right? A lot of complications.
Well, one can argue, that we're not at high risk like other countries. And you could argue ethically that, and I know we were under pressure to bring the vaccine, and I'm thrilled to have it. But other countries have got way bigger problems than us, let's be honest.
All right. Technical question for you. What's the contents of the Pfizer?
Yeah, it's very little. I can send you the full list later if somebody wants to know, but it's essentially the genetic RNA in a lipid, a fat bubble, and there's a little bit of a polysorbate in it to stabilize it. So there's a couple of things that stabilize it. I think it's got some salt in it. It's essentially stuff to keep it together. Very, very simple. If somebody wants the actual list, it's on the data sheet, or just ask me later and I can send it just so I get it accurate. Very limited list of things in it, though.
Okay, I'm going to go to the Reo Māori question shortly. It's going to really stump you, Nikki. You're going to have trouble with it.
Thank you.
But anyway, so what about this question? What's the efficacy rate for Māori?
Yeah, no, we don't know. So when they did the trials, they've been done internationally. Now, there have been Pacifica people on the international trials, and pretty well no Māori. There are different ethnic groups because they were done in 3 or 4 different countries, and they've got quite a range of ethnic groups. So we can't answer for Māori, but what I can say is there was no difference by ethnicity. Now, New Zealand does want to look at whether our immune response is the same for Māori and Pacific, and we hope to do that. But in the meantime, I cannot see why our immune response for a Māori person is any different when we look at all the different immune responses in these clinical trials across a lot of different ethnic groups. They all have a good immune response. So that's the answer for the moment. But once again, New Zealand wants to be absolutely sure and hope that we can do some study for Māori and Pacifica as well to reassure ourselves.
So the meningococcal one's an interesting example because that vaccine wasn't developed for the rest of the world. It was developed for us. And so we do have some data on a new vaccine for our population. We don't have data for Pfizer and COVID because we don't have COVID. I was talking to somebody the other day and saying, so, when you want to do a really big study like 40,000 people, you do it in a country that's got lots of COVID disease so that you can test the vaccine. New Zealand would have been the worst place in the world,
Exactly.
literally the worst place in the world to do a test on the COVID vaccine because we don't have COVID traveling. There's only one place worse, and that'd be Taiwan. You would be wasting your money. You would be taking years to enroll people because we got no COVID. What are you comparing it to? You give a vaccine to somebody, they don't get COVID. Everybody else doesn't get COVID too. You couldn't do the study here, I'm just saying. But all right, my travelers asked a follow-up question. Maybe my question wasn't clear. Can I have 2 vaccines, one now and a different one later? I think I know the answer to this. Hell yeah. We're interested. There's going to be a study shortly, I think. They're going to publish exactly that study. And potentially, at least intellectually, we're thinking, actually, that might be even better.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, I know this vaccine right now is one of the highest performing in the world. But in terms of longevity of action, we might be better off boosting with a different vaccine. So we're going to learn a lot in the next few months. And, from a science point of view, it's really interesting, particularly now we know how effective these vaccines are.
Okay, I'm going back up the list to the one about children. Apart from children, anyone else should not have the vaccine. So just to be clear, I'm thinking we're saying 16 years and up because that's the safety data we've got. And in your talk, you were saying, and my expectation is that over the next few months, the vaccine safety data for children will come out. And I'm predicting when it does, we will change our where our information and our invitation will go to different age groups, and it might go down to age 12, might go down to age 4. I'm not sure, but my prediction is that's exactly what will happen, and it won't be urgent. We'll just quietly announce to everybody that we're going to change the age, and we've got safety data so younger people can get it. You agree?
That's right. So the clinical trials are well underway down to 12. They're now starting them down to 5, and then they do 5 to 2, 2 to the little kids. So it'll just take a while before we get the full. It's the reverse of most vaccines because this disease kills the elderly more than the young. But there is enough burden of disease across our whole community that we can make an argument that everybody in the community should have the vaccine. And also, it'll give us some community protection and stop the spread. So ultimately, yeah, we want to give it to kids.
Okay, I'm going to have a crack at the Reo Māori question. Have you got it open in front of you? It says, hea te take ko te vaccine ko te ana he mō tātou. Kia whakaorenga i a tātou I tēnei mate. How come the vaccine's the only way of treating or protecting us? And then goes on to say, I think they're saying we were in France and we got this fact, we got the COVID, perhaps I think they're saying 3 times. And this person's describing that they've got some autoimmune diseases and they survived, and they took, I think they're saying they took vitamin C, vitamin D, melatonin, all of that sort of stuff. So the truth, I mean, this is a complex truth, isn't it? People who get COVID, there's a high death rate, but that's coming from a clinical side. That's coming from your GP who wants to tell you that 2% of people who get this disease dying is an absolute catastrophe. That's huge death rate. But I can see that somebody else would go, you know, they got COVID and people around them got COVID and nobody died. But, you know, I'm kind of looking at a sample that's 10,000 or 100,000. I'm not looking at a sample of 10 or 20. So 2% dying is absolutely huge, catastrophic. Imagine if that got into our community, it would be a tragedy that we would regret for decades. And to my knowledge that, I remember old Lance O'Sullivan, when COVID first came out, he was doing some technology stuff over in China, and he had this view, you know, strengthen your immune system, you know, and that'll get you through. Well, he dropped that pretty quickly. And I don't know there's anything that will strengthen your immune system to protect you from COVID. The chances of you having a terrible COVID experience, a really severe COVID experience, is significant in my medical opinion. And see, the thing is that I come from across the Kaimai Ranges there from Ngāti Raukawa, and we lost 2 of our whānau to COVID, and they were young. They were 55 and 60, you know, the Tehiko brothers. And so, you know, I understand somebody's experience to say they had COVID and they survived it, but I know how devastating it can be. And then the other thing is that I also know how devastating it can be if you survive it, but you have long COVID syndrome. And we are seeing that in the small numbers of people who've had COVID in New Zealand. We are seeing long COVID now here, and that does affect young people. It affects people who were in really good fit health and all the rest of it, and then can't go to the gym anymore because they get a huge tachycardia just on any exercise. So, you know, I'm keen for people to take whatever therapies you think that's going to get you well in your life. Well done. And I still encourage people to think about the vaccine as being a way of protecting you and your whānau and your community.
Rawiri, can I add to that a bit of history? As a non-Māori, talking about history is we're talking about a world community that has no immunity across the whole world. Now, you know, populations, when people came in and colonized them and brought diseases, wreaked havoc because they had no immunity. Well, now the world is facing that position that the whole world has no immunity at all. So we can do everything we can to keep ourselves as healthy as possible. But in the end, none of our immune systems have any memory of this. So since we were born, we've been experiencing respiratory illnesses and colds and all sorts of others. But this one we've never seen, which is why it's so devastating across the whole community. So people can be really scared of diseases, but they're often rare. And so, yeah, they might kill everybody who gets it, but they're very rare. But this is a disease that everyone is going to get. We are all going to get this disease. unless we manage to develop our own immunity. Now, the only way of developing immunity is being exposed to the virus and surviving, or having a vaccine. So, yep, everything we do, keep ourselves healthy, it makes a big difference. But vaccination is actually helping our immune system for the first time ever create immunity in a way that nothing else can do.
All right, another question about how many young people, babies, children have died from COVID in the world? And the answer is some. We've seen deaths in babies, we've seen deaths in children, we've seen deaths in young people, yeah? I haven't got a figure to mind, have you?
No, I haven't got a figure to mind. And of course it's rare, but it does happen. And also kids get sick from it. Also remember, there's quite a few kids out there with other medical problems who are at higher risk. And then the other argument is, so we're protecting our own kids, but also protecting those around them. It's the same argument as using childhood vaccines.
All right, Frankie's got a question I don't know again. There's another one. See, twice already I've been stumped. Some of these questions included some very worrying issues such as molecular mimicry. Have we had an answer on this? So
yeah, I love it. Another cool science question. So this was absolutely a concern right at the early studies in the first clinical trials, that if you get your vaccine wrong, the body responds in the wrong way and then creates an immune response to itself. So that's what a molecular mimicry is like. And yes, it was a concern at the start, and they looked for it really closely, right from the test tubes right through for the early clinical phase 1, 2, and 3 studies, no sign of molecular mimicry. And then now that we've got really, really large database on background rates, if you'd seen molecular mimicry, you would have seen increasing some of these autoimmune conditions we've been looking out for. So that was the reason, particularly, for looking out for autoimmune conditions. Now, for any of you who know a bit of science, the other answer to this is that you can either go through a T cell 1 or a T cell 2 pathway. And they know now that these vaccines go through 1, not 2. That's a bit of a science answer to it all, but
it's beautiful.
It's covered off.
I'm going to make you come around to one of the other things you've explained already, but okay, so like similar language, slightly different answer from you. So does the Pfizer vaccine change your DNA?
All right, this is really, really important. It is, firstly, it's not a DNA vaccine. Now, if we can all stretch back to our school science, you've got RNA, which is outside the nucleus, which is a messenger, and you've got DNA inside, okay? This RNA cannot get inside the nucleus, so it cannot get into your DNA. It physically cannot get into your nucleus, and it cannot change your genome. So it's not genetically engineered.
All right, good. So it's that little messenger RNA thing. All right, and it's not getting into your DNA. Beautiful. It's not rewriting.
Messenger's a nice word. You know, it's the little messenger that makes you make the proteins.
Okay, cool. Chris has come up with a really important question. How at risk are the remainder of the population if we don't get enough people vaccinated? Is there a threshold for herd immunity?
Yes, such a good question. The problem is we don't know yet how effective the vaccine is against spread. We know it's looking effective, and some of the data is showing it might be reducing spread by up to 2/3. Now, because we don't know the exact figure, I can't give you an exact figure for how much of the population would protect us. Early on, there was modelling that we'd like about 70% of the population vaccinated. We don't have an exact figure. So all I can say for us in New Zealand is the more people we do vaccinate, the more it will stop spread, but we don't yet have enough data to give the exact figure.
I was going to ask my own question there for a second, but I've got a lot of questions coming in, all right? People with compromised immune systems.
Yeah.
Should they have the vaccine? And can we define what compromised immune system is?
Yeah, so compromised immune system covers anybody whose immune system is not as vigorous as someone else. So you might be on cancer treatment, or you might have an autoimmune condition which affects your immune response. And our immune system is what we need to fight infections. So if your immune system is compromised, you're actually at higher risk of respiratory disease. So you are the people who need this vaccine more than anybody else. Now, what we do know from the data is that most people with compromised immune systems still get a really strong response to this vaccine. And there's really good data from Israel showing that people with even quite big immune problems are still responding well to this vaccine. It is possible if your immune system's really, really, really compromised that your response won't be so good, but you'll still have a response. So I would not want to be exposed to COVID if I had, a compromised immune system.
All right, I want to plug to the sponsors now, but what I mean by that is if you've got questions, here's my big advice. If you've got questions about the vaccine for you and your health conditions, it's a really good idea to talk to your GP. Your GP might be Nikki Turner, it might be me, it might be that you want to talk to the nurse at clinic, but it's a good thing to do, to actually ask the questions and sit with somebody who's going to take you seriously and step through what the answers are and help find the right answers for you. So that's my first plug. And Te Ao with Moana was a really good show. We had 2 Māori immunologists on that show, and they were great. They were talking about really a group of patients that, like Nikki's referring to now, people who are immunocompromised, and there's some people who've got some really complex health conditions. I expect them to be able to sit down and talk with their specialist or their GP or their nurse practitioner, right? And so because we're rolling out a program to anybody who's working at the border, anybody who's working at an MIQ at a COVID hotel, anybody who's working at the airport and their household bubble. And so if you're one of those workers, we're offering it to you and we're offering it to your household bubble. You describe who's in your bubble. And if we can keep all of that group safe, that's good for all of us. But it's an offer, it's an invitation. So if I think about a household bubble, each of those adults in your life who might be part of your household bubble, it might be flatmates, it might be your partner, it might be your wife, your husband, it might be your mother. All of those adults, actually, they're entitled to have time to think about, have time to ask the questions, have time to get information for them in their context with their health conditions, right? And I don't know, did I tell the story at the beginning, Nikki, that guy who came up to me down at the port the other day? It was after I finished talking down there, and he said, look, I just want to know if it's good for me because my asthma is really bad. I can't walk 200 meters without getting puffed. My COPD is we had some swear words in this conversation, and I like swear words, and he and I were swearing away. I can't walk 200 meters with my COPD. Oh, and by the way, I've got diabetes. And I said to him, bro, you're the person I want to protect with this vaccine. It's really important that this vaccine protects you, right? So there's a lot of vaccine around that person. If we can vaccinate everybody in the community, if we can do herd immunity, if we can get the whānau safe from COVID, I help protect him. But actually, I definitely want him to think about the vaccine for him. And he was happy with that answer.
To follow up, if people got really severe immune condition, you might respond to the vaccine as well. You still will respond, but maybe not as well. So in those cases, it's also really important that your whānau gets vaccinated. So not only will you get some protection yourself, and the vaccine is not unsafe, it's perfectly safe because it's not live, but if you vaccinate your whānau as well, you've got a double protection.
Okay, back to the science nerd questions just for you.
Bring them on.
So it's about how do we monitor the safety thing? Is there a specific range or list of side effects looked into for the trials, or all and any side effects experienced by participants recorded? Over to you.
Yeah, both. So they have diaries where they record everything that happened, and then they also actively go and search for particular conditions. It's back to the molecular mimicry question, is that there are certain conditions we're looking for that could theoretically have happened. So both of those ways are looked at in clinical trials, and they do short-term follow-up and they do long-term follow-up. So the Pfizer trials are still going right to the end of 2022, and they're continuing to follow up safety data.
Anonymous is typing questions faster than we can talk. I know it might be because we talk so much, I'm just saying, we do talk a lot, but I'm trying to get through as many as I can and reach out to some of the others. Is this vaccine part of a trial? Is our vaccine rollout part of a trial?
No, not at all. No, we're not included in the trial at all. In fact, nobody wants New Zealand in the trials because we have no COVID.
Okay. What is herd immunity?
Yeah, herd's such a terrible word. I call it community immunity. So when you have vaccine, it protects me because my immune system responds. But if also the vaccine stops me carrying and spreading the virus to someone else, then it's stopping the spread. And the more you can stop the spread, the more you create immunity across the community. And then when a virus arrives into the middle of the community, just lands, it can't spread out. So it's really stopping the spread of the virus through the community. So hence the importance of the message around this is not just for me as an individual.
Okay, we've got a new bidder in our auction. Trish has joined the questions. This is a genius question. Is there a concern that the vaccine will not provide defense against the strains that haven't developed yet? You know, there's new strains, there's new mutations. This vaccine, is that going to protect or not? How's this being?
It's a really good question. And the answer is, at the moment, it looks like this vaccine does protect well against the English strain, the one that everyone's worried about. And it's protecting well, but not quite so well against the South African, but pretty good. We don't know what will happen next. Now, what we do know from this type of manufacture is that if this virus does mutate again to something that gets outside, then they can, within a few weeks, recreate the vaccine. Now, that would mean a booster. So it could happen.
Can you see the list of questions? I want to ask you a meta.
So when I open them up, I lose your gorgeous face because for some reason.
So mine's a meta question, a question about the questions.
Right. So which one do you want me to look at, Awiri?
I just want you to scroll through, and you can go to any ones you like. Obviously, you're an autonomous person here, but there's a lot of questions there that where would you go to for somebody who had this set of questions? Quite a lot of questions from Anonymous.
Okay. So firstly, we've got lots of Q's and A's on the immune.org.nz website. So there's lots of Q's and A's there. You can actually go to Healthline, who might pass you on to us, or you can just go to your general practice. But try our website, try Healthline, or try your general practice. We're trying to populate rapidly the common questions on the immune.org website so that if people come up with questions that we haven't covered, we're trying to get more and more on the website. Because as you all know, there's a whole lot of misinformation out there. And so we don't want people to feel they have to go out there into the wider internet where there's a whole lot of junk and that you can get really confused. So we're really trying to give you the best science we can through the immune.org website. So that would be my starting point, and I hope that we can keep working on it for you.
Okay, technical questions. Were cancer patients included in the studies, in the vaccine trials?
To be honest, I can't remember. In some trials they were. I can't remember the numbers, but they're certainly included in the rollout data. And of course, now we've got vast amounts of rollout data. And again, the problem for cancer patients is, would they respond to the vaccine? We're sure it's safe for them. But if their immune system is really not working well, their response might not be quite so good. So cancer patients need this vaccine. There's a lot of cancer patients around the world, millions, who have used this vaccine safely.
Okay, Chris's question, since we know so little about herd immunity, how at risk are we of hosting a mutation if we don't stamp it out? Now, before you go to that, you know what? When I read the question, I started thinking about measles again. So with measles, we've got this big campaign to try and get community immunity for measles. And we didn't really get it right. And I think that's the health system did a pretty poor job of getting that group of young people vaccinated 15 to 30 years ago. And now we've got a catch-up program to try and catch them up and get them vaccinated. And then we got little breakouts, right? We had a little breakout in Christchurch, and then it got transferred up to North Shore. And I was working in Papakura, and I said, I got the clinic team together, and I said, it's up there in North Shore because there's groups of people who have refused to be vaccinated, and it's coming to us. It's going to come to us, people. And week by week, we saw exactly that happen. Then it came to South Auckland. We had it sort of break out. Nobody died in South Auckland, but worse than that, we exported it from New Zealand to Samoa with devastating consequences. 60 kids died of measles. And part of it was there was a chain of transmission that we hosted it. We didn't have sufficient community immunity, yeah?
Yeah, we did. And I've had the privilege of chairing the International Committee for Measles Eradication, and we've failed, quite frankly. And we've failed because immunisation systems around the world haven't vaccinated adequately enough kids. Now, I'll be a bit heretical with COVID. We are not going to keep COVID out of New Zealand. There's too much in the world. It's going to come into New Zealand. We can't keep it fully eliminated. We just can't. But what we can do, if we vaccinate high enough, is that we can stop it spreading wildly. So we will get a degree of community immunity, even if it's not total. We will get quite quite a strong degree of community immunity, and then we'll be able to manage the patches where it breaks out, because it still will come.
All right, the Reo Māori questions come back and they've kind of clarified for me. The second part of the question was about there's very few people with comorbidities in the clinical trial vaccinated group and way more in the placebo group. We know that Māori got way more, have got, heaps of comorbidities, autoimmune diseases, et cetera. So the vaccine efficacy for Māori is not clear. Do you agree?
No, I don't, because the clinical trials, they're pretty matched. The comorbidities aren't, they're actually a matched group. They were randomized groups, so they're actually pretty matched. And also have a look at the Israeli data. The Israeli data is very compelling, that they have looked at people by comorbidity, and they've looked at people with 1, 2, and 3 comorbidities. And what they're showing is the vaccine effectiveness is slightly less if you have 3 comorbidities, but it's still effective. So yeah, you might not be 95% effective if you've got 3 comorbidities, but you're still effective. So, the Israeli data, and, it's really impressive data, and the English data is looking the same. So, I've got a lot of confidence that it should work. It just won't be 95% on people who've got really significant health issues. It will still have some effect though.
Okay. Hasn't it been shown that there's cross-reactive immunity in populations from having had previous coronavirus infections?
Yeah, a really cool question. This is such a cool, nerdy one. There was some suggestion that the Asian communities weren't as badly affected as the European, possibly because SARS and MERS had spread through them. And the other coronaviruses, we don't think there's cross-protection. There is some theoretical possible cross-protection from SARS and MERS in some communities. Once again, for the New Zealand setting, not likely to have a lot of impact. So I don't believe we're likely to have any real effective immunity within our population.
Okay, quick fire questions. What data has been provided to our GPs?
Well, the GPs have got training programs and there's more going on. They've had webinars, they've been online. There's a whole lot of different avenues. We've been writing them in New Zealand Doctor, in the New Zealand College of General Practitioners updates, and online. So there's a lot out there and there's more going.
Can you give me a quick count how many webinars you've been on with colleagues?
No.
A lot. You can't even remember now.
No, okay. Sorry, folks. It's a
Will
Friday
the vaccine
night.
affect someone with severe penicillin-based severe reaction?
Yep. Okay. So listen, the incidence of anaphylaxis we said is rare. It's possibly slightly higher if you've had like anaphylaxis, severe allergic reaction to anything. So my advice for anyone who's had a very severe allergic reaction is tell the vaccinator and make sure they observe you closely for that 20 minutes and you know what you're looking for. It's not a reason not to vaccinate, but it's a reason to make sure you observe closely.
And so, because you're kind of doing a hell of a lot of work training all these vaccinators, you and I are now expecting that that's a pretty standard question. Have you ever had an anaphylactic reaction? Have you ever had a severe allergic reaction? That's what we expect, isn't it?
Yeah, and we'll be asking people that. And we're talking severe. There's loads of allergic reactions. You're talking about somebody who has a really severe one. We have trouble breathing and your lips swell up. So those are the ones we observe people closely.
If you're receiving chemotherapy, can I receive the vaccine?
Please do. I mean, once again, you need protecting if you're on chemotherapy. Have the vaccine. There's no safety concerns, but once again, your immune response might not be as strong as somebody else's. So make sure your whānau get vaccinated as well.
Okay. Have there been any, no, it's an assertion. It's a statement, which is not even a question. We can respond to the statement. There have been some very interesting studies into treatments like vitamin D and ivermectin, for example. Yeah. Have you read this research?
I've read some of them. The vitamin D, the latest meta-analysis shows it's not having any effect because we were all hoping it would. So I'm a little disappointed. The ivermectin one, look, I've read it lately. To be honest, I'd have to go back and have a look. There are some stuff coming through about some biological products that might be helpful. At the moment, good old-fashioned steroids are the most useful. So there are some biological products that help, and they certainly help severe COVID disease, and the world's rapidly accumulating knowledge. I'm on the edge of this, and I'm aware of it, None of them are highly effective, but they're certainly using them, particularly for severe COVID disease. I'm not sure about ivermectin. I'd have to go and look it up.
Now some of that question, some of that answer says it would be good for this person to be able to find out a bit more about treatment stuff. Not my specialty. I'm not your ED doctor. I'm not your ICU doctor. But clearly, the doctors that I know who are working in that area have done an enormous amount of research right now to try and understand what it looks like and how to treat it. And so that actually in New Zealand, we've got, as good as you can get kind of understandings of how to do a good job of treating anybody with COVID. And going back to something you said earlier, even with a really fantastic vaccination program, it's reasonable to imagine that from time to time we'll have a little outbreak of COVID. There will be some people who got vaccinated, but still didn't get covered. There'll be occasional, and so we still got to know how to treat it. But it won't be
absolutely.
me. I'm your GP. I'll be referring you into hospital if you get it. Okay.
Same here. I mean, I know a little bit, but not enough. But I do know that our hospital services, New Zealand's got the advantage of lots of resources, and they're reading and talking to their international colleagues and collecting up the medications that at this stage are looking useful to treat COVID.
Okay, we've gone over time, but nobody's left. So you've probably got, another 5 minutes? You okay with 5 minutes, Nikki? Okay.
Yeah.
It's a nerdy question, special one just for you. Will there be a sero survey carried out before the rollout to the general public so that we have an idea of the background immunity already present, like a baseline?
No, there won't be. And there's two reasons for it. Firstly is that we're very confident already that there's very little COVID in New Zealand. So it's really a waste of money, quite frankly. And secondly, we still don't know what we call the correlative protection. So we know you can measure an immune response, but we don't know what the actual protective level is. So we could do a sero survey, but I actually think our money is more importantly spent in much more important questions. And what New Zealand will hope to do is an immune measure for Māori and Pacifica populations to ensure that they do respond to the vaccine. And I think that's useful, even though we're pretty confident there won't be a difference. It's good to be reassured. We're a different population than others, and we want to be confident.
All right. Now, if you can see this other question is sort of 4-part question. So Anonymous has got tricky on me here. I can see 4 questions. I'll do my best. How do you work around some colleagues that are not keen on getting the vaccination? So, like I've got a lot of colleagues. I've got a lot of relationships in the business across the sector. And yes, there are some health professionals who are not keen on getting the vaccination. And I treat them in the same way that I treat my patients. You know that survey, it said 70% of people are okay about getting the vaccine, and so they're trying to make this story called vaccine hesitancy. And I went, no, far out, man. We're asking a question of people about having a vaccine when we didn't have the vaccine in the country, and treating, preventing a disease which we also did not have in the country. We did not have COVID traveling in the country, and we did not have the vaccine in the country. And when you asked a whole lot of people, 70% of them went, yep, I'm in. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic.
So did I.
Yeah. 70% of people going, yep, I'm in. And then it's not hard to imagine that if we answer some questions and respectfully answer some questions, respectfully give people time to get the information they need, I think we get to 80% pretty easily. My target, I think, if we do a really good job of the vaccine rollout, is we're going to get to 90%. And so if my colleagues have kind of got some questions, same thing, I'm going to treat them with respect. We're not going to demonize people who decline. No, that's okay. So let's try and figure out what their anxiety or what their information need is. Let's do all of that with respect for them, because they're the same as us. They're human beings, and in New Zealand, they got a right to say if they want it, don't want it. And I just want to make sure I've given them really good information.
I really support that. And I want to say that it is about trust. And if somebody doesn't trust me as a healthcare professional, then why would they trust the vaccine? So if you've had bad experiences in the past and had a bad time with your healthcare services, and you don't feel they're giving you trusted information, then it's no surprise you turn the vaccine down. So I think for all of us, the importance of being really honest and open about what we know about the science, what we don't know about the science, what works, what doesn't work. And if we then as a community can spread that around, we're going to do okay. But if we start getting really polarized about it and start yelling at each other, we're not going to get anywhere.
Will it come back to vaccinators of COVID should only be those who have had their own vaccines done?
Yeah, look, I think for the safety of the vaccinator, that's totally appropriate. And we are trying to vaccinate our vaccinators before they vaccinate others. So that's the intention of the New Zealand program. There is no vaccinator in New Zealand that would not themselves choose to be vaccinated.
And so that's true for you and me. If the vaccine starts rolling out in general practice, we're not there yet. We're doing it in special centres now, but you can imagine sometime in the future, or maybe even next year, when we're having a kind of, we have a dose every year, like the flu or whatever. That will be our position: is that we want vaccinators to be vaccinated before they do it, right?
Yeah.
And
I think as frontline healthcare professionals, it's fairly unethical for us not to vaccinate ourselves, because not just to protect ourselves, but because I don't want to spread it to the community. That's the message from us. So primary care, you've got really high uptake of vaccination. Some other healthcare professionals don't work with infectious diseases, don't work with vaccines. So you have some people that don't understand the issues so well.
Okay. I had one more that I'm just going to do, which is there a plan to vaccinate communities that are at high risk because of social and demographic factors? Is New Zealand prioritising those poor brown communities at risk?
Do you want to answer that one, Rawiri? We're absolutely doing our best on that one.
Well, and we're doing it in interesting ways. We're saying, let's understand what that risk is, and we're trying to get data on that. And we can see that, South Auckland has an interesting combination of more people working at the border than, say, I don't know, St. Heliers and Kohimarama and Remuera. So more people working in COVID hotels and more people working at the airport. So there's more risk in South Auckland of exposure to the COVID, but we also know there's more risk from impact from the COVID. So that community is something that we should offer and protect and look after that community really early. I agree with that. But that will have kind of a truth to it across the whole country of communities at risk. And that's one of the things I think New Zealand is kind of way better at doing than some of the other communities where we've seen the rich people get access first. We're not doing that. You can't buy the vaccine here. You cannot jump the queue, people. So when it's your turn, you get the offer, you get the invitation, and you make your decision. And yeah, so that's what we're doing.
Kia ora.
Okay, look, I reckon we wrap it up. There's some beautiful questions there. We answered 42 out of 50, or 42 out of 49. So good on us. Really welcome the opportunity to spend time with people. Just recommend that if you've got more questions, and everybody should have questions, that's cool. So when you're comfortable, you've been offered the vaccine, and you want to say yes to it, that's great. Book in and get it done. Get your household bubble sorted so that they have their questions answered. And if your questions haven't been answered tonight, that's cool. Go somewhere, worthy of looking after you. Go to somebody you trust. Go to a website you trust. Okay.
Can I just finish with that too? One other way of getting advice is you go to your health professional you trust. And if it's an issue they haven't heard of, we run a national phone line for the providers. They'll come to us to get back to you. So, do go and ask. We want to hear what your questions are. Keep asking.
So that's Dr. Nikki Turner from the Immunisation Advisory Centre, and she's a GP. I'm Rawiri, I'm a GP. Peace out.
Kia ora.